Welcome to the second volume of Creepify True or False, the Halloween edition. Let's get started. A lot of us remember what it was like when we realized we were too old for trick-or-treating. I do, at least. I had to keep it a secret how bummed I was because it was a favorite activity of mine to get dressed up. When we were young, my other girlfriends wanted to be superheroes or princesses. I wanted to be a witch or a vampire. My town of Chesapeake, Virginia has a cutoff age of 14 for trick-or-treaters, though I hear it's not as strict these days. Look it up if you don't believe me. It was a Class 4 misdemeanor for anyone who got caught, and there was an 8 p.m. curfew as well. Of course, they modified the law after I was out of high school. Go figure. So this was around 2009. I think Halloween was on a Friday or Saturday. I was a sophomore that year, and my birthday was during wintertime, so I had one last hurrah the year prior. But this year was going to be my first night at home. My friends Marcia and Ellie and I decided to have a get-together at Ellie's house. She had the biggest bedroom and HBO, so we planned to have a movie marathon at her place. My dad drove me over to Ellie's home. Marcia was already there. We hung out in the living room and watched some scary movies, passing out candy to the trick-or-treaters, and living vicariously, albeit slightly resentfully, through their enjoyment. Now, Ellie's parents were early birds, which I found quite disturbing in my younger years. I mean, who the hell chose to wake up at sunrise? So about half an hour after the rents had gone to sleep, Ellie, Marcia, and I were sitting on the sofa, Ellie in the middle of us. She shot us both a mischievous look. "You guys up for some fun?" she asked. "What kind of fun?" I asked, slightly intrigued. "Follow me," she said. We went upstairs to her room, and she asked me to close the door after myself. She pulled out a shabby cardboard box from beneath her bed and took out a folded board. "Monopoly isn't really my idea of fun," Marcia said. Ellie didn't say anything. She just opened the board and sat it on the floor in the center of us. A Ouija board. I'll admit I was a bit scared of the notion. There weren't so many scary stories about Ouija boards back then, but my mom told me a vague story about making contact with a spirit when she was a kid, and I'd always wondered if it were possible. Marcia scoffed. "Oh, come on. You know these things are just a bunch of hocus pocus," she jested, making a horrible Bette Midler impression. "Well, then you have nothing to worry about," Ellie replied. She took out some white pillar candles and set them in a circle around the board, lighting them and shutting out the lights. "I heard you're supposed to use candlelight." Marcia rolled her eyes, and we sat in a triangular formation around the board, our fingers on the planchette, waiting for it to move. Ellie asked something about there being anyone in the spirit realm who wanted to communicate with us. Marcia and I looked at each other and smirked, and the planchette began to move. I jumped back and took my hands away from the board. "You can't take your hands off," Ellie said urgently. I apprehensively placed my hands back on the planchette and looked at Marcia, who seemed even more freaked than I was. "Tell us something we don't know," Ellie continued. A few seconds later, a knock came from the other side of the wall. Marcia and I gasped. Ellie kept going. "Are you someone that's passed?" Another 2 knocks, louder this time. "Did 2 knocks mean yes?" she asked. 2 more knocks boomed from the wall. "I don't like this," Marcia said. "Can we just go watch more movies or something?" I could tell she was visibly upset, even in the dark room. This time there was a single knock, louder than the others. "I don't think it wants us to stop," Ellie said. She was beginning to get worried too. Marcia was breathing heavily. I felt stuck. I was officially done and hoped to call it a rest and go downstairs. There was a stillness in the air I couldn't explain. It was like something hadn't truly happened yet. I don't know how to explain it. Without anyone speaking a word, another knock boomed out, this time from behind the door. We all shot back from the Ouija board. I remember I put my hand down on one of the candles and burnt the hell out of my palm. Wax poured onto the carpet. Our heads shot to the door as it burst open. A man stood there, still. You hear all those stories about break-ins with disheveled-looking guys who had crazy, unkempt hair. But this guy looked almost normal, save for a sickly look on his face. My skin tightened around my bones. You'd think in a moment like that, you'd scream hysterically, but all I managed was a pitiful yelp. The man entered and charged for Ellie. Marcia picked up a candle and flung wax at his eyes. You could tell she got him square in the face, but he didn't cry out. One of the scariest parts of that night that I remember was he didn't make a single sound. Nothing. It's a blur how we got out, but I remember we made it to Ellie's parents' room. She shook her dad awake and cried out that there was an intruder. I picked up the bedroom phone but couldn't get a signal. The line had been cut. Ellie's mom sat with us while her dad went to look for the man. I was catatonic and Marcia couldn't stop crying. Her father returned and told us that the intruder had broken through Ellie's window and escaped that way. The cops came and took our statements. My dad came back a few hours later and picked me up. I couldn't be in Ellie's bedroom anymore. They never caught the guy. And a few weeks after the fiasco, I asked Ellie and Marcia if they'd moved the planchette before the knocks began. Both of them denied it. A lot of my buddies always made a big deal about Halloween. Now don't judge me, but I couldn't care less about it. Don't get me wrong, it's a nice time of year when the seasons change, and autumn chases away the summer heat, which I'm not a big fan of, but I'm not really into the whole dressing up horror stuff. I don't necessarily scare easily, but my friends call me jumpy, if that makes sense. My story begins about a week before Halloween. I was in the latter part of my college career and had fallen asleep in my dorm room on this particular afternoon. I think it was Tuesdays and Thursdays that I had 12 hours straight of classes, with about 15 minutes to spare in between each one, so on the other days, I used my afternoons to nap. Anywho, I was half out of it and heard my phone going off from my nightstand. I was too groggy to catch it in time, but I noticed that the caller ID said unknown number on it. After that, there was a voicemail notification. I listened to it, and it sounded like a muffled recording. A whispered voice came on after a bit of heavy breathing. I think it sounded like he was saying, "It's a mouse," but frantically. I tore the phone away and put it back on the end table. I tried to lay back down, as I still had some free time and didn't have much homework for the following day, but I couldn't sleep. That voicemail got to me. A few days passed. I went to classes like normal, finished schoolwork, hung out with friends, all that jazz, and managed to put that phone message out of my mind. Since Halloween was in the middle of the weekend before that was when everyone celebrated. Like I said earlier, it wasn't a big deal in my book, but I never said no to a party, no matter what the occasion. I mean, I was freshly 21. My friend Curtis, who I'd known since freshman year, had an off-campus house with 2 other guys. It was a good-sized 2-story house with 3 bedrooms and a massive living room. They had a shindig for school starting at the end of August, and I had a blast. The Jell-O shots and 3 kegs were also pretty rad, so I assumed it would be the same for Halloween. The party started around 9 on Saturday night. I borrowed a black suit and tie from a friend of mine and made a little FBI badge out of poster board. I was Fox Mulder. I thought it was pretty clever, but I got some eye rolls when I flashed my fake ID with a little picture of David Duchovny printed on it. I had a great time, had a few drinks, met some cool people, we danced and pretty much had the perfect night. After the guests had gone down, Curtis and I were the only ones left. A handful of people left their cars and got Ubers home. My school had a thing where they'd give out rideshare coupons to students to cut down on drunk driving. One of Curtis's housemates gave me the go-ahead that I could use his room to crash in, and Curtis slept in his room. Most everyone else stayed at a girlfriend's house that night. I passed out with my phone in my pocket. I can't tell you how much time passed, but I woke up to buzzing on my thigh. I let it go to voicemail because I was beat to hell, and then it rang again. I begrudgingly put my phone to my ear without looking at it, and muttered some half-assed greeting, And I kid you not, I was met with that same voicemail I told you about when I started this story. But as he repeated what he said, it wasn't "it's a mouse." It was someone's inside the house. I shot up in bed, a cold sweat beginning to chill me. The door was open. I sneaked over to it, pressed my body over to the wall by the door, and listened. I tiptoed over to Curtis's room. His door was shut and locked, so I tried to whisper through the door. I took out my phone to text him, as I heard the commotion downstairs getting a little louder. I remember just sending him it's me," over and over and over again until he let me in. Curtis was already on the phone, whisper screaming to who I assumed was the police. He was giving the dispatcher his address. Then he put the phone down so we could barricade the door with a dresser, right when we heard thundering footsteps ascending the stairs. It was like a wild animal on the other side of the door. He screamed unintelligibly. Saying I was scared doesn't cover it. We leaned our bodies against the dresser to try and keep the lunatic out. I'm kind of embarrassed to say this now, but I sent my mom a text that told her I loved her. And let me tell you, she told me later that she chalked it up to a night of heavy drinking and wasn't happy that her only son woke her up at 3 o'clock in the morning that way. It took 7 minutes for the police to arrive. Downstairs was trashed. Some things were beyond repair, but a PS4, Blu-ray player, iHome, and other effects were left untouched. The only thing that was missing was the biggest knife from the butcher block in the kitchen. It didn't help the police that we had no description of the dude and no reason anyone wanted to hurt us. A guy was caught a few months later after there was a break-in in the next town over. I don't know if it was him. If it was, he didn't admit it, but I saw a picture of him, and I couldn't look at it for too long. Have you ever seen a photo of someone and just had to look away? Like you can just tell that someone is evil? The real kicker is this. When Curtis and I were talking later that night, he apologized for not letting me know about the intruder. I asked him who the hell it was that called me, and he had no idea. Nevertheless, we made it through that night. Curtis and I are still friends to this day. We lived together a couple years after college, and still grab a beer every now and then. And whenever the subject comes up of doing something on Halloween, we politely decline. So now is the time to find out which of our stories really happened. I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts. You can let me know in the comments whether you guessed right. The first story was about a couple of girlfriends hanging out on Halloween, and they mistook an intruder for a spirit in their home. So did this one happen? Actually, kind of. I wrote it, but it was based on the true story of Daniel LaPlante from the 1970s. If you want to hear about a truly terrifying true crime story, look into that case. The second story was about a creepy prophetic voicemail that a college-age male got before a break-in at a Halloween party. Did this story happen? Nope, I made it up. Thank you for joining me for the second Halloween episode of Creepify True or False. I hope that everybody enjoyed it, and thank you for staying with me. I wish everyone out there a safe and spooky Halloween, and as always, thank you for watching.